Hi everyone and Happy New Year! Today I'm going to be going over my top 10 books of 2021 and I'm actually going to be splitting them into two videos, my top fiction books of 2021 and my top nonfiction books of 2021 because I actually had such an incredible reading year and I had such success with both fiction and nonfiction this year that I thought I would split them into two videos and give them their due. So without further ado, I'm going to be jumping into my top 5 fiction books of 2021 with a couple honorable mentions. So I'll start with the honorable mentions first. And the first one was called Ghost Forest by Pic Xuan Feng, and I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. She is a Canadian author and she is of Hong Kong heritage. And this book is really short and sweet. It's written in prose, which is what I loved about it. It was basically these vignettes into this woman's life from childhood into adulthood and her relationship with her father, who worked away in Hong Kong for the majority of her life. And so because this family immigrated from Hong Kong to Canada when they were young, the kids are much more Canadian and less traditional than the parents, and the father really struggles with that. And so they have a very strange relationship, but they find out that he's dying. And so it's basically this woman trying to grieve and come to terms with this relationship that is not perfect, but you can tell how much they love each other. So it's just absolutely beautiful and I really recommend it. My next honorable mention is called The Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arakawa, and this one was translated into English from Japanese. I gave this one 5 stars, and this one is another short one. It's basically about a stray cat who is taken in by a man, and the cat is the narrator, and he's got such a funny sense of humor. And for reasons explained in the story, after about 5 years, the man can no longer keep this cat, and so they basically go on this van trip around Japan trying to find a new owner for this cat. It is so heartwarming and so sad, and I ended up like ugly crying at the end. But it was such a good time overall. So if you're looking for a cozy read, this is definitely a 5-star read that you should be picking up. So finally getting into my top 5 fiction books of the year, this one is probably, well, if you've been paying attention to this channel, it might not come as a surprise, but it came as a surprise to me. So number 5 on my list is called A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. And I didn't even give this one 5 stars. I gave it 4 stars, but I just can't stop thinking about this book. And so because of that, I thought that it deserved a spot on this list. This is a really low-rated horror book, but I absolutely loved it. And I loved it because of the atmosphere. So essentially, again, it's another short one, and it's about these 2 teenagers. They're on their first date and they decide to go on a canoe trip on various lakes. And so there's 2 lakes, and then he decides, oh, there's a third one, they should go check it out. And so as they're paddling, they look down and they discover a house at the bottom of the lake, which is so creepy to me, and I just thought was such a clever idea. And so they're super into each other. So over the summer, they fall in love as they explore this house with their scuba gear. And as I said in a previous video, what I thought was so incredible about this one was how Josh Malerman managed to take things that are very mundane, like mundane objects that you would find in a house, and he made them so terrifying. And so it's a sort of a haunted house story, very strong on atmosphere. If that sounds good to you, I really recommend that you pick it up, because I thought that even though the ending wasn't strong, and that's why I didn't give it 5 stars, I just thought that the experience of exploring this house with these 2 teenagers and all the tension and the terrifying things that happen made it worth being on my list this year. So I had a really good time with it, if you can't already tell, and hope that you also enjoy it. And if you don't, sorry about that. The next one was another absolute surprise to me. I had no idea that I would love this book so much, and it's a more recent read for me, and it's called The Book of 3 by Lloyd Alexander. And this is actually a children's fantasy written in 1964. And what I loved about it is, I mean, it has a great plot. It's a high fantasy. It has Lord of the Rings vibes, but the characters were so wonderful. I loved every single character in this book, and they made me laugh and smile, and it was just such a good time. And so this book is about Taran of Caer Dallben, and he is a young boy. He lives at this place where there's a wizard, but he's really living a very mundane life, kind of as like a farm hand, and he wants more for himself. He wants an adventure. And he's given this title of assistant pig keeper, which kind of follows him throughout this book, and it becomes such a funny gag. And of course, he begins an adventure and meets a bunch of different characters along the way. So he meets Gurgi, who's this kind of weird creature type thing, who is very fearful but quite loyal and speaks in these hilarious rhymes. There is Flute or Flam, who is a king, but he has given up that life to be a bard, and he likes to color the facts. Which is what he says for when he lies. And he has this magical harp, so whenever he colors the facts, one of the harp strings breaks, which is another hilarious gag. And then my favorite character is called Eilonwy, and she is this courageous, kind-hearted, and very honest girl. And the things that she says to Taran just made me laugh out loud. She is just one of the best characters I've ever seen. So I really recommend it. The audiobook is fantastic. And if you're looking for just a wonderful fantasy story with strong characters and a fun plot, you should really pick this one up. It's the first in a series called The Chronicles of Prydain, and there's 4 other books in the series. All right, so number 3 is one that many people are putting on their top lists this year, and it came out in 2021. It's called Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and this is science fiction, and I loved this book. I couldn't believe how fun and heartwarming this book was. It is about a man, and he is actually a teacher, but I think he has sort of a science background, and he wakes up on the spaceship alone and with no memory of what happens. But he basically finds out that he alone has to save Earth from this threat. But he meets a very unlikely friend along the way, and together they have to save their respective planets by working together. And this again had just an incredible character, an incredible friendship, and was such a fun read. It was an adventure. It had really fun science facts, but was still accessible. And at the end, I was like so happy. Don't you love it when a book just leaves you like so happy inside? So you should definitely pick up Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, even if you aren't science fiction fans. Number 2 on my list is by my favorite fantasy author, Guy Gabriel Kay, and it's called A Brightness Long Ago. I've been really struggling to try to figure out how to explain the plot with this one. Not that there isn't a plot, but it's just so character driven that it's more about the characters, I think, than exactly what happens, even though there's lots of fun moments. So I'm just going to do a brief read of the synopsis. It says here, in a chamber overlooking the nighttime waterways of a maritime city, a man looks back on his youth and the people who shaped his life. Danny O'Sara's intelligence won him entry to a renowned school, even though he was only a son of a tailor. He took service at the court of a ruling count and soon learned why that man was known as the Beast. So before I go on, one of the things that was so incredible about this book is that it had this theme of fortune's wheel and the choices that people make that can ripple out into the entire world. Small decisions that we make that have major impacts. Danny's fate changed the moment he saw and recognized Adria Ripley as she entered the Count's chambers one autumn night, intending to kill. Born to power, Adria had chosen, instead of a life of comfort, one of danger and freedom, which is how she encounters Danio in a perilous time and place. And Adria is probably my favorite character of 2021. She knows that she has a brief time in her life where she can choose her own destiny, and she takes full advantage of it and decides to live a life of meaning. And in this case, that means killing this count. She has incredible scenes. There's this horse race that is so exciting. Like, I was on the edge of my seat reading this race, and it was just one of the best reading moments in 2021. And so there's all these other characters involved. So there's a healer, there is a charming, frivolous son of immense wealth, there's a powerful religious leader who is more into decadence than being devout. And then it says, affecting all these lives and many more, two larger-than-life mercenary commanders, lifelong adversaries, whose rivalry puts a world in the balance. And this is one where sometimes you don't even know who to root for, but you just enjoy reading about these powerful, impactful characters. And the thing that I love most about Guy Gabriel Kay, and it was particularly true in this book, is his lyrical writing. There are times when I have to stop reading and go back and reread something that he wrote, because it is so moving and beautifully put and thought-provoking. So it was such an enjoyable read, and if you haven't ever read Guy Gabriel Kay, I really recommend you pick him up, because I think his writing is stunning and you will not regret it. So that leaves us with the last book on my list, my favorite book of 2021 in the fiction category, and that is the book called The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. And this book, I read this one near the beginning of 2021, and I have yet to stop thinking about this book. It left such an incredible impact on me. So this book is set on Jeju Island in Korea, and it spans from 1938 to 2008. And as you can imagine, a lot of things happened in the world during that period of time, including World War II and the Korean War. And that was one of the things I loved so much about this book, is I learned about historical events that I thought I knew a lot about, like World War II, but I had no idea about the impact of those events on Korea and the fact that the Japanese occupied Korea. It is also about two women as they grow up, they're best friends, and then something happens that tears them apart. And they're part of this culture called the Haenyeo. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is a culture of women divers, and they're free divers. And so they basically make a living for their families by free diving out in the ocean and collecting abalone and other valuable sea creatures to sell. And they do this because of the Japanese occupation of Korea. The men were not allowed to work. And so they actually relied on the women to make a living, and they took care of the household tasks and raising the children and making meals, which is such an interesting culture and one that I really hope to learn more about. And so these two girls basically become Haenyeo, and we go through their lives and this betrayal that happens and all these events that happen in Korea. It is a very difficult book. It's very powerful, very impactful. There is violence and tragedy in this book, so if you're uncomfortable with that, maybe look it up before reading it, but it's so worthwhile. And so the thing that I found most powerful about this book is this theme of betrayal and forgiveness. And I was really wrecked by it, to be honest with you. It haunted me thinking, would I be able to forgive in this situation? And what is the cost of not forgiving? So if that sounds good to you, I really highly recommend that you pick this book up sooner rather than later, because it was one of the most impactful historical fiction books I have ever read. And with that, that is my top 5 favorite fiction books of 2021. I really hope that you found something on this list that seems interesting to you, and I would love to know in the comments down below what your favorite fiction books of 2021 were. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye.